Chapter 21 of The Virginian. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Virginian by Owen Wister. Chapter 21. In a State of Sin. Thunder sat imminent upon the missionary's brow. Many were to be at his mercy soon. But for us he had sunshine still. "I am truly sorry to be turning you upside down," he said importantly. "But it seems the best place for my service." He spoke of the tables pushed back and the chairs gathered in the hall, where the storm would presently break upon the congregation. 8:30? he inquired. This was the hour appointed, and it was only 20 minutes off. We threw the unsmoked fractions of our cigars away, and returned to offer our services to the ladies. This amused the ladies. They had done without us. All was ready in the hall. "We got the cook to help us," Mrs. Ogden told me, "so as not to disturb your cigars. In spite of the cowboys, I still recognize my own country." "In the cook?" I rather densely asked. "Oh, no, I don't have a Chinaman. It's in the length of after-dinner cigars." "Had you been smoking," I returned, "you would have found them short this evening." "You make it worse," said the lady. "We have had nothing but Dr. MacBride." "We'll share him with you now," I exclaimed. "Has he announced his text? I've got one for him," said Molly Wood, joining us. She stood on tiptoe and spoke it comically in our ears. "I said in my haste, all men are liars." This made us merry as we stood among the chairs in the congested hall. I left the ladies and sought the bunkhouse. I had heard the cheers, but I was curious also to see the men, and how they were taking it. There was but little for the eye. There was much noise in the room. They were getting ready to come to church, brushing their hair, shaving, and making themselves clean, amid talk occasionally profane and continuously diverting. "Well, I'm a Christian, anyway," one declared. "I'm a Mormon, I guess," said another. "I belong to the Knights of Pythias," said a third. "I'm a Mohammedist," said a fourth. "I hope I ain't going to hear nothing to shock me." And they went on with their joking. But Trampas was out of the joking. He lay on his bed reading a newspaper, and took no pains to look pleasant. My eyes were considering him when the blithe Scipio came in. "Don't look so bashful," said he. "There's only us girls here." He had been helping the Virginian move his belongings from the bunkhouse over to the foreman's cabin. He himself was to occupy the Virginian's old bed here. "And I hope sleeping in it will bring me some of his luck," said Scipio. "You'd ought to have seen us when he told us in his quiet way. Well," Scipio sighed a little, "it must feel good to have your friends glad about you." "Especially Trampas," said I. "The Judge knows about that," I added. "Knows, does he? What's he say?" Scipio drew me quickly out of the bunkhouse. "Says it's no business of his." "Said nothing but that?" Scipio's curiosity seemed strangely intense. "Made no suggestion? Not a thing?" "Not a thing. Said he didn't want to know and didn't care." "How did he happen to hear about it?" snapped Scipio. "You told him," he immediately guessed. "He never would." And Scipio jerked his thumb at the Virginian, who appeared for a moment in the lighted window of the new quarters he was arranging. "He never would tell," Scipio repeated. "And so the Judge never made a suggestion to him," he muttered, nodding in the darkness. "So it's just his own notion. Just like him, too, come to think of it. Only I didn't expect well, I guess he could surprise me any day he tried." "You're surprising me now," I said. "What's it all about?" "Oh, him and Trampas." "What? Nothing's surely happened yet?" I was as curious as Scipio had been. "No, not yet, but there will." "Great heavens, man, when?" "Just as soon as Trampas makes the first move," Scipio replied easily. I became dignified. Scipio had evidently been told things by the Virginian. "Yes, I up and asked him plumb out," Scipio answered. "I was lifting his trunk in at the door, and I couldn't stand it no longer, and I asked him plumb out. "You've sure got Trampas where you want him. That's what I said. And he up and answered and told me. So I know." At this point Scipio stopped. I was not to know. "I had no idea," I said, "that your system held so much meanness." "Oh, it ain't meanness." And he laughed ecstatically. "What do you call it, then?" "He'd call it discretion," said Scipio. Then he became serious. "It's too blamed grand to tell you. I'll leave you to see it happen. Keep around, that's all. Keep around. I pretty near wish I didn't know it myself." What with my feelings at Scipio's discretion, and my human curiosity, I was not in that mood which best profits from a sermon. Yet even though my expectations had been cruelly left quivering in midair, I was not sure how much I really wanted to "keep around." You will therefore understand how Dr. MacBride was able to make a prayer and to read Scripture without my being conscious of a word that he had uttered. It was when I saw him opening the manuscript of his sermon that I suddenly remembered I was sitting, so to speak, in church, and began once more to think of the preacher and his congregation. Our chairs were in the front line, of course, but being next the wall I could easily see the cow boys behind me. They were perfectly decorous. If Mrs. Ogden had looked for pistols, daredevil attitudes, and so forth, she must have been greatly disappointed. Except for their weather-beaten cheeks and eyes, they were simply American young men, with mustaches and without, and might have been sitting, say, in Danbury, Connecticut. Even Trampas merged quietly with the general placidity. The Virginian did not, to be sure, look like Danbury, and his frame and his features showed out of the mass, but his eyes were upon Dr. MacBride with a cream-like propriety. Our missionary did not choose Miss Wood's text. He made his selection from another of the Psalms, and when it came, I did not dare to look at anybody. I was much nearer unseemly conduct than the cow boys. Dr. MacBride gave us his text sonorously. "They are altogether become filthy. There is none of them that doeth good, no, not one." His eyes showed us plainly that present company was not excepted from this. He repeated the text once more, then, launching upon his discourse, gave none of us a ray of hope. I had heard it all often before, but preached to cow boys it took on a new glare of untimeliness, of grotesque obsoleteness, as if some one should say, "Let me persuade you to admire woman," and forthwith hold out her bleached bones to you. The cow boys were told that not only they could do no good, but that if they did contrive to, it would not help them. Nay, more. Not only honest deeds availed them nothing, but even if they accepted this especial creed which was being explained to them as necessary for salvation, still it might not save them. Their sin was indeed the cause of their damnation, yet, keeping from sin, they might nevertheless be lost. It had all been settled for them not only before they were born, but before Adam was shaped. Having told them this, he invited them to glorify the Creator of the scheme. Even if damned, they must praise the person who had made them expressly for damnation. That is what I heard him prove by logic to these cow boys. Stone upon stone he built the black cellar of his theology, leaving out its beautiful park and the sunshine of its garden. He did not tell them the splendor of its past, the noble fortress for good that it had been, how its tonic had strengthened generations of their fathers. No, wrath he spoke of, and never once of love. It was the bishop's way, I knew well, to hold cow boys by homely talk of their special hardships and temptations, and when they fell he spoke to them of forgiveness and brought them encouragement. But Dr. MacBride never thought once of the lives of these waifs. Like himself, like all mankind, they were invisible dots in creation. Like him, they were to feel as nothing, to be swept up in the potent heat of his faith. So he thrust out to them none of the sweet, but all the bitter of his creed, naked and stern as iron. Dogma was his all